when the administration decides to roll back these new bonding rates, it's intentionally siding with cheats and scammers over American taxpayers. And it's letting those who actually profit from drilling offload all that cleanup costs on you and me.
Welcome to The Landscape, your show about America's parks and public lands. I'm Aaron Weiss with the Center for Western Priorities in Denver.
And I'm Kate Groetzinger in Salt Lake City. Today we're talking about what happens when oil and gas companies go bankrupt and leave messes for taxpayers like you and me to clean up. The Biden administration put rules in place to keep this from happening, but the Trump administration is trying to repeal them. No surprise there. And that could stick us taxpayers with billions of dollars in cleanup costs, while oil and gas companies pocket even more cash and pollute our public lands. But before we do that, let's do the news.
The Senate is moving full steam ahead with plans to use the Congressional Review Act to repeal yet another Biden-era resource management plan. It used the CRA to repeal the Miles City Field Office RMP back in October, and this time they're looking at the Buffalo City Field Office RMP in Wyoming. Both of those plans limited coal mining in the Powder River Basin. Repealing those management plans will throw public land management across the entire country into chaos because it calls into question the validity of resource management plans everywhere passed since 1996, which is when the Congressional Review Act went into effect. Now, a bunch of conservation groups, including the Wilderness Society, Conservation Lands Foundation, Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, and Wild Montana, have all now signed a letter to the BLM's acting director identifying thousands of specific oil and gas lease permits that could now be illegal because if those RMPs are not legal because they weren't submitted to Congress at the time, everything is potentially at risk. This is, in fact, the chaos scenario that we were warning about months ago. That is now starting to play out. The question now is, will someone sue? And if so, where does that happen?
So similarly, or somewhat related, the Senate Natural Resources Committee, helmed by Senator Mike Lee, held a hearing on the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, which spells out that process by which those resource management plans are created. And that hearing was on November 19th. And while the hearing was pretty quiet, there was a lot of hand-wringing from Republicans about top-down decisions by the feds and a need to alter FLPMA to increase the ability of local governments and states to have input in land management decisions, as well as the need to alter FLPMA to make permitting quicker. Senators suggested putting timelines on permitting decisions, as well as altering FLPMA to give governors more power over land use plans. Meanwhile, expert witness Jim Kenna, who ran California's BLM office for over a decade, said the main issue with land management planning is actually a lack of resources at BLM, and pointed out that the Trump administration is only making this worse by cutting staff and funding across the agency.
And of course, we are waiting to hear about a hearing on Steve Pearce, President Trump's nominee to run the Bureau of Land Management. All of this stuff with resource management plans, with FLPMA, all of that lands on his plate if he is confirmed. And as we mentioned last time, Pearce is a longtime opponent of public lands writ large and has pushed for decades to sell off America's public lands. This is going to be a huge test for that bipartisan Senate Conservation Caucus that we just heard about. What are they calling themselves? The Stewardship Caucus. And a lot of those members are going to be in a really tough spot here because if that caucus exists to fight off and stop attempts to sell off public lands, how can those members vote for a guy like Steve Pearce, who has spent decades talking about how much he wants to sell off America's public lands? Stay tuned on that one. Could see a hearing in December, maybe January. A whole lot can happen between now and then.
That's right. And feel free to contact your lawmakers and tell them how you feel about Steve Pearce.
Our guest today is David Jenkins. He's the president of Conservatives for Responsible Stewardship. David is joining us to talk about a new report his group just put out on oil and gas bonding. David, welcome to The Landscape.
Thank you for having me.
How do wells become abandoned or orphaned in the first place, and how do companies get out of having to clean them up?
Plugging the wells and cleaning up the well sites after you finish is actually a condition of getting the permit. Now, we're just promising that you're going to do that as a condition for the government giving you permission to drill. So these oil and gas companies are promising the American taxpayer essentially that they'll clean up their mess. And quite a few live up to that promise. But as you hinted at, there are bad actors in the industry that find creative ways to skip out on that obligation. In some cases, it's a smaller operator that owns several companies, and they'll declare bankruptcy for one of the companies and then just move on and operate under the heading of a different company. And in other cases, it's a bit more elaborate. Once a well is almost tapped out, bigger oil companies will then sell those wells to the smaller operators. And then those companies, they will pull out the last remaining amounts of oil and then transfer that well to a third company that only exists for the purpose of going bankrupt. And so it's like a giant shell game designed specifically to scam taxpayers.
Wow. Well, that sounds hard to track. So kudos to you and your group for trying. David, what threats do these abandoned, unplugged wells have or pose to public lands? Like, why are they a problem and why do they need to be plugged in the first place? And in addition to that, do we know how many there are on federal lands right now?
These abandoned wells, they can leak oil. Even though they're extracting most of the producible oil, they can still leak oil. They can leak oily water or water that's got other toxic chemicals in it, and those run into streams and rivers. And, these are places where, especially on public lands, where people may be trout fishing or it could be drinking water supplies or whatever. So that's a hazard. They also emit methane pollution, which is a pollutant that contributes to smog and other poor air quality issues. And it also is a major contributor to climate change, far more potent than carbon dioxide. In terms of numbers, there's about 130,000 of these across 27 states. Those have been documented. So we know for sure there's at least 130,000. But the actual number is estimated to be around 4 million because it's a lot of legacy wells that people have lost track of. In Pennsylvania alone, there's so many old oil wells that nobody really knows where they are now. And they're just sitting there leaking, emitting methane and so forth. So it's a huge problem. So you can see why we think it's a kind of a good idea to stop the bleeding. I mean, if we've got 4 million of these, or even if we just got 130,000, that's enough. That's more than enough. We need to stop having them. And the way to stop having them was to make the industry do what they promise, clean up their mess.
David, real quick clarification. I feel like sometimes when people think of oil wells, they think of like a big pump jack or an oil derrick or something. And it's like, how could you lose that? How could you not know where that is? But are they just sort of like a pipe sticking out of the ground in most cases? Or what does this infrastructure actually look like? Like if you were to come across it on a hike?
Yeah, it varies. You could have a whole pump jack sitting there rusting away, or they could have removed the pump jack to use it somewhere else. And you just have basically a big hole in the ground. And if it's oil well, it's one thing. And, it can look a little different if it's just a gas well.
I want to talk about the dollars that it takes here. So before 2024, the average bond that the Bureau of Land Management held was like $1,700 per well. I assume that's, nowhere close to what it costs to actually clean up these wells, right?
So bonds are essentially an insurance policy to protect taxpayers from oil and gas companies skipping out on their obligation. The government has required that these companies secure bonds since 1920. But the problem is that the costs covered by the bond have not kept up with the actual cost of plugging and cleaning them up. So, in fact, until the most recent bonding reforms that we're hoping don't get rolled back, they covered, as you mentioned, just a tiny fraction of the cost. So in 2023, we estimated that taxpayers were likely on the hook for as much as $15.3 billion in estimated cleanup costs. But with the current administration's push to drill millions of more wells, that number is only a drop in the bucket compared to what we could be facing.
So you mentioned the Biden reforms. You're talking about this oil and gas rule that was passed by the Bureau of Land Management in 2024 that updated minimum bonding rates. And I think, changed the way bonding works, like blanket bonding and stuff like that. Do you mind going over those changes, specifically how much they raised the minimum bonding rate and other good reforms that were put into place?
The rulemaking that happened under the Biden administration increased the minimum lease bond amount from 10,000 per lease, which is not per well, per lease, to 150,000. BLM estimates as an average of 14 wells per lease. So if you go back to that 10,000 number and you say, okay, let's divide that by 14, that's how much was being covered by the bond, and taxpayers were covering the rest. And, the range of cost on these things, like from 30,000 to 200,000 to clean up these wells. Wells today are a lot deeper than they used to be. We do fracking, all these different things. You go down deeper. So then the ability to plug up that well and clean up after the costs have risen, and inflation as well. And the problem is that administrations, Democrat, Republican, doesn't matter. They've been very reluctant to increase any cost on the oil and gas industry because their lobby's so strong.
So then walk us through what went into the creation of the rule in 2024. BLM chose not to require companies to post bonds for the full costs necessarily of plugging and reclaiming a well. Why did they do that, and how does that play into what decision the Trump administration may or may not take coming up here about what to do with those 2024 rules?
Hard to tell why they actually decided to back away from full cost bonding. Actually, in the Mineral Leasing Act of 1920, the language appears to actually require full cost bonding. It says an adequate bond, surety, or other financial arrangement to ensure the complete and timely reclamation of the lease tract is required. But somehow that language has been ignored. But I assume that they chose not to go with full cost bonding due to pushback from the industry and the wide range of cleanup costs for wells. You got 30,000 to 200,000. I guess they're trying to find some sweet spot that they wouldn't get too much pushback from the industry. But for us taxpayers, we should all want full cost bonding. We shouldn't want to be paying any of it because these guys are making the profit off of the drilling activity. So they're taking all the money. So why on earth would it make any sense for them to take all the money and then take all the costs and throw it up onto average everyday American taxpayers?
So, David, in your report, you say that an estimated 3.8 million wells could be drilled due to all of these sort of energy dominance policies that the Trump administration and Congress are putting into place right now, where they're just throwing open the gates to drilling on federal lands. So how high is the potential bonding shortfall that taxpayers could be stuck covering if all of these wells are drilled and the Trump administration successfully rolls back these bonding rates that were put into place?
One of Trump's first acts when he came into office was to issue an executive order declaring a national energy emergency. This was 100% Orwellian BS. When the Trump administration took office, U.S. oil production was at 13 million barrels per day. It was breaking all previous records, U.S. and global records. And the U.S. is currently producing more oil than any other nation, including Saudi Arabia. And the same is true with natural gas. U.S. is a global leader, producing 41.2 million cubic feet in 2023. So what's the emergency? Basically, this is an excuse to get around normal environmental processes and steps you have to go through before you can make these changes, so they can shorten comment periods and all that stuff. But when the administration decides to roll back these new bonding rates, it's intentionally siding with cheats and scammers over American taxpayers. And it's letting those who actually profit from drilling offload all that cleanup costs on you and me. So to show you just how ludicrous this is, any company that lobbies against the new bonding rates by saying they can't afford that extra cost, well, the bonding is only a fraction of the cleanup cost. So they're essentially copying to the fact that they're unable or unwilling to plug and clean up their wells, which is a condition of their permit. So they're saying, let us make a profit from drilling and pawn off all the costs on average Americans. And the Trump administration, if they do this, is essentially saying, sure, why not? In terms of total cost, we're talking an estimated 3.8 million wells drilled based on the new push toward oil drilling on public lands. So rolling things back to that paltry $10,000 per lease could potentially show a bonding shortfall of $753.5 billion.
That's
So
with a B.
B.
That's so three-quarters of a
trillion.
trillion
Yes.
dollars. Yeah.
And I mean, that's insane. Why would anyone who is remotely conservative think that adding to the national debt and saddling the American taxpayer with almost $1 trillion in cleanup costs is anything other than a fiscal nightmare? You can't call it conservative. I mean, you're basically enabling a scam on the American taxpayer. Everybody pays taxes. They should be outraged at this. And this issue has flown below the radar for a long time because, it's a little technical and wonky and stuff like that. But these costs are not technical and wonky. These are things that everybody will feel, either by your tax rates eventually going up or by our deficit getting even worse. And, it could be $1 trillion because we're just basing this on current cost of cleaning up the wells. Inflation and stuff, that increases that cleanup cost.
So accountable.us looked at what happened in Wyoming in particular after these bonding rate changes, and they found that oil and gas production actually increased even after the bonding rates went up. So is there any reason to believe that the rate that is set for these reclamation bonds actually determines whether oil wells get drilled on public lands, whether or not it actually does anything to oil production, or is this just companies not wanting to add on a minimal cost they might have to eat? I mean, is there any evidence that this is actually having any effect on what people pay at the pump, for example?
It won't have any effect on the amount of drilling. It doesn't have any effect on the overall price of oil products, gasoline, and so forth, because it's globally set. They have to be competitive. But you just look at what states have been doing. You mentioned Wyoming, but Colorado also has stronger bonding requirements. Utah has stronger bonding requirements than the federal government. And we've not seen any slowdown in drilling in any of those places. Heck, the royalty rates that these states charge for drilling on state lands. Texas is like 25%. And, Trump wants the U.S. to be like 12%. And they're still drilling on Texas state land. So if it's not having any effect, then clearly, the administration is just advocating for a right deal for taxpayers with no net benefit other than to make maybe a few people wealthier at the expense of everybody else. I just want to stress the point that these companies promise to do this as a condition of getting the permit. In other words, they wouldn't get the permit unless they say, yes, we're going to clean this up. And then to do that without any intention of actually cleaning it up and trying to run these little shell game scams to make sure that taxpayers foot the bill, that's wrong any way you slice it.
So the Trump administration we mentioned earlier has mentioned that they are planning on rolling back these bonding rates. Can you walk us through that process, especially where the public could maybe get involved?
Yeah, well, it's just like with any federal rulemaking, they'd have to issue a rule that rolls back everything, and then there'd be a public comment period. Although with this administration, their tendency has been to truncate those comment periods to as short as humanly possible under this emergency authority and everything that they try to claim, even though they're no emergency. Once the administration issues this proposed rulemaking, then there should be a comment period, and we'll have an easy way for folks to submit comments on our website, conservativestewards.org. But it's also important for people to just get mad enough to start spreading news about this on social media before it even happens. Let people understand what kind of bill we're starting to get, saddled with, and the impacts of this, whether it's on sportsmen or other agro-recreational users on public lands, whether it's cities like Salt Lake that have smog problems, low-level smog problems, whether it's communities concerned about their water supplies and come from public lands, and then taxpayers who are going to get saddled with the bill. I mean, everybody should be outraged about this. And so if you are outraged about it, if you listen to this podcast and you're outraged about it, then go on Facebook, go on Twitter, go on Instagram, go on TikTok, whatever it is, and let people know just how crazy this is. Maybe, if there's enough outrage, the political calculus for the administration could change a little bit, and maybe it won't be as bad as we think.
And folks, we'll put links to the Action Center and the Conservatives for Responsible Stewardship in the show notes, as well as some social toolkits in case you want to just post about it and don't want to write your own.
David, I want to ask about your group's name. What is conservative here? Is being a conservative being pro oil and gas drilling all the time? Is being conservative being responsible for taxpayers? Explain your organization's name and how you think you fit into the broader conservative social media ecosystem here.
Well, I like to call us genuinely conservative. If you go back in history, Sir Edmund Burke was widely known as the father of modern conservatism, is a British statesman. And then you have Teddy Roosevelt, is a Republican. A lot of people try to label him as a progressive, but he actually wasn't. He was a big fan of Edmund Burke. And so what he was worried about, he wanted to protect capitalism. And he was worried that if capitalism goes too far in one direction and there's too much excess, then it would actually encourage socialism, like you were seeing in Europe. So he wanted to put guardrails on capitalism so that everybody understood that it was operating the way it's supposed to, so people wouldn't turn to other economic systems. So he was very conservative. That was not progressive or liberal. That was very conservative. You look at Russell Kirk and T.S. Eliot, there's a lot of minds in conservative thought in the past. And going back as recent as Reagan, for example, you look at some of his quotes about our responsibility to protect the land and the water for future generations. The stronger emission standards for cars in California. He took credit for that. And Margaret Thatcher talking about climate and our responsibility of future generations. And that's really the essence of conservatism. This is not like in the 60s with the liberals where it was, if it feels good, do it. Now we have the political right saying essentially the same thing. If it feels good, do it. But it's different vices, but same principle. And so what we're saying is conservatism is living within your means. It's looking out for future generations and all that. And conservation and conservatism, they all come from that root word conserve. And so I don't think you can be a conservative unless you understand the concept of conserving and being good stewards of what we've been blessed with.
Yeah, I love that reminder that Ronald Reagan actually implemented some of the first air pollution standards in the country as the governor of California. It's something we should all be talking about more.
Yeah. He also signed into law the first climate bill, which was actually written by Joe Biden in the Senate. But how times change, right?
Absolutely. Well, David, is there anything we forgot to ask you about this reporter that you'd like to highlight?
I just want to one last time underscore the whole point that if these companies are saying, hey, we can't afford this bond, which is a fraction of the cost of cleaning up, how would you ever expect them to say that they can clean up, which they promised to do? So it's just a false argument all the way around, and we should not pay the bill. If they're going to make the profit, they should pay the cost. We shouldn't. And I just want people to get mad about that because it's ridiculous. We shouldn't be subject to a scam. John McCain and William Proxburgh used to do those Golden Fleece Awards where, they would highlight something that fleeces taxpayers that people should be outraged about. Well, this should get that award 100 times over.
That's a great place to leave it. David Jenkins, president of Conservatives for Responsible Stewardship. We got links to his organization and everything he talked about here in the show notes. David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Now for a little good news to end the episode. The House Public Lands Caucus, which of course is the House version of that Senate Stewardship Caucus we mentioned in the intro, is headed up by Representatives Ryan Zinke and Gabe Vasquez, and that caucus has endorsed their first bill, Representative Vasquez's Public Lands in Public Hands Act. This bill is a great step towards stopping the sell-off of national public lands. It would require the BLM to seek permission from Congress to sell parcels of BLM land over 300 acres that are accessible by land and parcels of over 5 acres that are accessible by water. It's not a complete ban on selling public lands, but it is certainly a step in the right direction. It's still got a long way to go to pass, though, starting with the House Committee on Natural Resources hearing.
That is it for us today. As always, we love to hear from you. You can reach us, podcast@westernpriorities.org. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe and like button. We hope you have a great holiday next week, filled with gratitude for your family, filled with plenty of food, and plenty of public lands. We've got some exciting episodes coming your way on stream access and wildfire, so please subscribe and share wherever you are listening or watching right now. The link to the full video is in the show notes if you want to watch us talk about all this stuff. And if you're watching this, you can find that audio-only version anywhere you listen to podcasts. We're a great airplane listen, if I do say so myself.
Thanks again to David for his advocacy and his time today, and thank you for listening to The Landscape.